Hi, I'm David Mendoza, Managing Director at Alexius International, and we're very excited to be here with you today at USTTI for this Rural Access and Telecommunications program. We hope that the lessons learned and some of the case studies we're presenting today on the Latin American countries are of interest to you and that they invoke some good dialogue and discussion.
Hi, my name is Ben Sawolka, and I'm an ICT consultant with Alexius International. I'm part of the team that helped design, implement, and continues to support the various last mile initiative projects in Latin America. Our presentation focuses on the similarities and contrasts between the various countries and focuses as well on the challenges that each of the projects faced. We hope that you can draw from our experiences.
The Last Mile Initiative in Latin America basically focuses in 5 countries: Guatemala, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Paraguay. Now, as you may have already heard, the Last Mile Initiative by USAID is actually being deployed in more than 25 countries worldwide. But how were these 5 selected? These were selected through a competitive process whereby the missions in each country prepared a proposal that included some business plan elements, what the conditions and the regulatory environment were, and then these were evaluated by a committee in Washington, and these were the 5 countries that were finally selected. Okay, so the challenge put forward by USAID is we had to address a certain number of requirements. First was we had to answer the question, why are the large telcos, why hasn't somebody come up with a better mousetrap in addressing this issue? So we had to come up with innovative business models. We had to figure out how we're going to scale this nationally. These are national scale problems, and we had to figure out how do you take these pilots, learn from them, and be able to deploy them at a national level. We had to identify technologies that made sense cost-wise and services-wise in terms of deployments that would be sustainable in these rural communities. We had to integrate USAID mission programs. We had to make sure that the value of telecommunications, of having greater access, would provide an additional incentive or betterment to democracy initiatives, health, education, economic growth, and issues of competitiveness. We had to ensure that the government provided support that the regulatory environment was enabling in order for these projects to really take off. And lastly, the resources available were limited, so we had to develop alliances locally to ensure a sufficient level of investment and that we were able to drive the demand for service. Now, what were the environmental constraints? What do you find in a rural context? Well, first of all, low population density. This is a big issue because you don't have enough of a scale to address and really have a sufficient income stream to make things sustainable. You have low income. Differentiating it from urban areas, low income makes it an additional challenge and kink in the chain, if you will. High transport costs. The backhaul costs and getting connectivity to the community, let alone distribution, it tends to be high. Again, the last mile cost. Until a few years ago, the only option was really copper or some kind of cable or physical means. That's high maintenance and high cost of deployment, now with lower cost solutions, but we still needed to address those costs. And again, there's unattractive profit margins for the established telcos, so this was a reality we had to address in our projects. Now, what are some of the model assumptions? First of all, we were going to more than likely use wireless technologies. They're ultimately cheaper and easier to deploy and tend to be better than wired. We were going to try to look at issues of sustainability through scale. We identified that initial subsidy was required to achieve scale. We also made the assumption that we would be in a competitive market environment where we would get competitive costing and pricing, and we would have a number of choices on which carriers or telecom providers to partner with. We needed an honest broker function. This was a very important element in our equation, and that is that we could have somebody who would have the best interest of the project and of getting connectivity to the rural communities, not so much only a profit-based decision-making process. And lastly, the entrepreneur. This was a key individual in the community that had an established track record and that had the capacity to carry out and would put their reputation on the line to make sure the project was successful, and that they'd understand the needs and requirements of the local clientele.
So the model has to respond to the challenges that David mentioned. And we can see in this graph here some of the challenges that evidence why the current telecom sector does not want to go into the rural market. As you can see, the orange line is a business, a net worth of a business in a rural community where the prices have to be low. Within your first month, you are investing tons of money that you're not going to recuperate for another 4 years. And that's why the model has to have a subsidy component. It's also important to have a franchise component, because a rural entrepreneur is really not going to have $150,000 to invest right off the bat into his community. So with this model, even though in the long run it may be sustainable, in the short run the business model has to be architected in such a way that you offset these losses in these 4 years of not getting a return on your investment. Another way to look at this is through the market point triangle. As time passes, the cost of equipment goes down, and as time passes and people have more opportunities through the technology we give them, their purchasing power also increases. However, that point where the cost of having a new user is equal to the purchasing power of the market, something we call the market point, really is not going to happen in rural areas for several years. So telcos don't want to go in yet because they realize that they would have to subsidize in order for it to work. So our model has to include a subsidy component until the market point is reached. And after that point is reached, the businesses can continue to profit without any help of a subsidy. So based on the requirements and the assumptions, we created the micro-telco model. The first element of the micro-telco model is the franchise. If you think about it, franchises, in order to succeed, implicitly have to scale. So this responds to the requirements. They also provide the advantage of streamlining the proliferation of technical know-how throughout the rural areas. The entrepreneurs can go to one-stop shop place for getting the expertise they need to run their business. So the franchise is really a great way to start, and it's really an innovative business model. It really has not been done successfully in very many places.